This is Scott the Fix-It Guy. Today we have a Whirlpool washing machine that is not spinning. We're going to be replacing the brushes on the motor. And most of these machines don't have an ability to replace worn out motor brushes, but this one does. It's not too hard to do. You have to remove this spring clamp from the front that holds the door gasket or the bellows. And we're going to fold the bellows in toward the spin basket. Kind of get it out of the way because we're going to have to remove the front panel. Open the detergent drawer, and then there's 3 screws we have to remove here in the front. And these are kind of holding on the front panel. You want to put these screws in a certain position to help you remember where they go, because they're all kind of different sizes. Get the bottom plate taken off, just pry that off. We're going to remove these 4 screws. There's 2 for the door switch and there's 1 for the door sensor. Or, I'm sorry, 2 for the door sensor.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, now we're removing these 3 screws from the bottom of the front panel. And now we're going to take off the top panel. So there's 2 screws on the back here you have to remove, and then you can push the panel back away from you and then lift it off. Pulling that off, and we'll loosen these screws at the top that are holding on the control panel. There's one here, upper left and upper right hand corner. So once those are off, you can lift the control panel off the front of the machine, kind of lift it up and out of the way. And then there's a little catch here that you have to push in on to get that to loosen up. Then there's some screws here at the top of the front panel. We're going to lift up on the front panel, kind of lift it up and pull away from you. There's 2 catches in the upper left, upper right hand corner. You have to lift it off. And now we have access to the motor. We're going to pull the spade connector off of the left brush assembly. And it's on there pretty tight, so you may have to use a little pin to lift it off. And then there's 2 screws holding on the brush assembly, 2 Phillips head screws. We're going to loosen those up. I'm doing that with a pretty long, extended piece for my Phillips head screwdriver. It makes it really easy. I'll reach in, I'll pull out the old brush, and the carbon piece here looks maybe about 50% of normal. So I'm going to cut off this little plastic piece. Here's the new one. We can compare the size of the 2. So it definitely was worn down. When they wear down too far, the spinning will get weaker and weaker, and then eventually it won't even agitate or spin. So I'm going to push the new carbon piece in against the motor, push the brush assembly into position. I'm going to kind of line up where the holes are with where the screws go. And then I'll go ahead and add the 2 Phillips head screws back in. that brush is all done. We just got to put the spade connector back on for power. I'm going to open up this part on the motor control and just make sure that these two electrical connectors are on there nice and tight, because they also are part of what makes the machine spin. But it's pretty common for these brushes to wear out. I'm now removing the two Phillips head screws on the right brush assembly. Already removed the spade connector. Get those screws out of there, and then I can pull the old one out. And this one's really short, so you could tell this is probably why it wasn't spinning. This is only maybe 1/10 or 1/5 of what it should be. So I'm going to clip off this little plastic piece on the new one. You can compare the two. So it's really worn down. And same thing, I'm going to push this in. It's spring loaded. I'm going to push it in against the motor to get the carbon piece to retract. And then I'll add those two Phillips head screws to hold it in. And then I'll put the spade connector back on. So I'm just putting the two Phillips screws back in. It really helps to have this extended piece to get in here, because the motor from the front area is back about maybe 10 to 12 inches. Let's get that other screw in there. I'm going to kind of start it by hand. There we go, and we'll zip it in. Okay, that's done. We'll just put the spade connector back on for power. And this motor should do really good now. It should be basically like a new motor. So again, not all Whirlpool washing machines have this. In fact, very few have this where they have replaceable brushes. Now we're going to put the front panel back on. I'm going to push the door gasket in to kind of get it out of the way. Just set it down on its little catches and line up the holes, and I'll put those screws back in. So two at the top, bottom, front, top left, and top right. Put the control panel back in. Trying to line up the dispenser tray with the front panel. Put the screws on the front panel on the bottom right, bottom left. And there's also one in the middle too, so there's actually three at the bottom. Just push the bottom panel in, just clips into place. We'll put those three screws back in. Just kind of take your time to line up that dispenser tray, get it all straight, and then put the screws back in. We'll put the detergent drawer back in. Screws on the top. And top panel goes back in, and then 2 screws in the back to hold it. There we go. So we're going to put the door sensor back into position. There's 2 screws that hold that on. And this is the door lock. We're going to push that back into position and then put those 2 screws in too. Got that. We're going to put the door gasket back on around the rim of the front panel. We put a little liquid soap on the spring clamp to make it more slippery. It makes a big difference when you put these on. Put the top of it at the 12 o'clock position and the spring down at the 6 o'clock at the bottom. I'm going to kind of spread out and push down with my thumbs to get the spring to go over the 6 o'clock position. You might be able to use a screwdriver to help you too. Close the door. And we give it a little test. We'll set it for spin and drain. Turn it on. It takes a little while on this model for this thing to fire up and do its spin cycle. But it started spinning really good, just basically like a brand new machine. There we go. So hope that's been helpful to you and fixes your machine. Please subscribe when you get a chance.